been, I think, a significant development in the labor movement in the United Kingdom. So members of the union called Unite elected Sharon Graham as the new General Secretary of the union. And Unite is the second largest trade union in the UK. So it has 1.4 million members across construction, manufacturing, transport, logistics, and other sectors. And so there were three candidates in this race, and in some ways, Graham was the least likely to win. And many analysts kind of saw this campaign in this union as a proxy war for battles inside the Labour Party. So Graham focused her campaign on being about the members instead, and the bread and butter of what a union should be doing. And so there were some within the left and outside the union, inside and outside the union, that backed Steve Turner, who was the favorite candidate of the outgoing leader of Unite, Len McCluskey. So why this matters is McCluskey was a staunch ally of Jeremy Corbyn. So he was firmly in Corbyn's corner during the leadership contest in 2016. He widely has criticized the purges of the left wing that's the current Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, is carrying out. So it's kind of expected that if Steve Turner was McCluskey's successor, he would also be a major ally of the left wing of the Labour Party. But Graham, she focused on less broader political fights. So her slogan was Westminster versus the workplace. And she was saying that for too long, the focus of the union has been on the Labour Party and not enough about actually organizing new members. So let's listen to her explain this perspective in one of her campaign videos.
Our power doesn't come from Westminster. When British Airways announced plans to fire and rehire 36,000 workers, the politicians failed. It was workers who won that dispute. And when it's time to take on companies like Amazon, the PM won't stand up to Jeff Bezos. We will. Our power is rooted in the workplace. That's how we win. When workers first stood on the picket lines, we didn't have Westminster on our side. We just had each other. We still have each other. My name is Sharon Graham, and I'm running for General Secretary of Unite the Union. We now face an historic moment. We can keep depending on the politics while bosses pick our pockets, or we can come together in the workplace and stop them. When we do that, we can build the power to drive the politics, instead of politicians attempting to drive our union.
So it seems that Sharon Graham was able to win by taking her message directly to rank and file members. Max ODonnell Savage, who's a workplace rep with Unite, wrote about the campaign in Tribune magazine, and he said, buy-in from active membership, taking ownership of the campaign was the only way Sharon could win this election. Sharon didn't have Murdoch support like Coyne, nor did she have the incumbent and senior Unite staffers backing her like Turner. Sharon's win was the result of lay members leading at every level of the campaign. They were able to present a clear vision for left-wing change, bringing about a breadth of support that no other candidate could match. Savage went on to explain why her message resonated with others like himself in the union, saying, the truth for many members and workplace reps such as myself is that we feel there hasn't been a strong enough commitment to build power from the bottom up. There is a need to give workplaces right across the board the support to have a fighting chance against ruthless bosses. From building the membership density in workplaces to accessing resources, they need to run successful campaigns. Graham staged her first walkout at the age of 17 and built a reputation within the union for being a very skilled negotiator and campaign strategist. She promises to invest more in shop steward infrastructure to beef up bargaining committees across the union. She also advocates for Unite to take on more ambitious organizing projects against corporate giants like Amazon. But there is not agreement throughout the left that Graham's victory is a good thing. After all, some think it would have been better to have a firm ally of the Corbyn wing of the party as the head of a major labor union. Some fear that Graham will abandon the Labour Party and leave the left wing even more defenseless against attacks from the Labour right. Just like labor unions in the United States and the Democratic Party, unions in the UK are heavy financial contributors to the Labour Party. And in the UK, they actually have a little bit more of a role of shaping appointments and policy. But it seems highly unlikely that under Graham, Unite will stop giving to the Labour Party altogether. But Graham has said that there will no longer be blank checks for the party, meaning candidates will actually have to show and prove that they are allies of the union if they want their support. And more broadly, I think her message is that unions cannot rely on the Labour Party for their success. And this issue, and part of why I'm talking about it, is I think it comes up a lot in U.S. politics. And, first, to be clear, the Democratic Party, even with all its flaws and all the things we just talked about with Luke Savage, is still by far better to unions than the Republicans. And during the 2020 presidential election, I thought it was very important for people to vote for Biden just on the issue of the National Labor Relations Board alone. And often, though, leftists in the labor movement, like myself, have been frustrated with how much it seems like unions rely on the Democratic Party to improve their fortunes. Literally since Jimmy Carter, labor has campaigned hard for Democrats in the hope of labor law reform, and it still has not happened. But even if we did get our dream candidates elected, ultimately it's going to take the organizing of the labor movement itself to get the job done. Let's take the example of Bernie Sanders. Now, I was very active both at the local and the national level with Labor for Bernie. And part of what we try to do in that group is get labor unions at the local and national level to endorse Bernie. So clearly, I think it's important for unions to back the right candidates and to be involved politically. But even if we got Bernie elected, unions would still have to focus very hard on how to organize new members against corporate giants like Amazon if we're going to revive the labor movement. And, the elected officials and policy have a role to play, but the focus should still be developing our capacity as a movement to organize. And going back to the UK, the situation at the electoral level is pretty bad right now. The centrists in the Labour Party have the upper hand and are ruthlessly attacking the left wing. By no means do I think this is permanent and it's inevitably going to stay this way. But given this context, I think it makes sense that a union leader might want to focus more on developing its own infrastructure and power for now. Except maybe in exceptional circumstances, if politicians are going to give unions what they want, it's usually because the labor movement is strong enough to force them to do it. And so in the United States, yes, unions should still be endorsing Democrats over Republicans in close races. Yes, they should give money where it makes sense. When exceptionally pro-labor candidates come along, of course, they should give them the wholehearted support. And generally, I'd like to see more unions develop political programs where they're running their own members for office. But also, in this moment, maybe it makes sense to give more money to training shop stewards or internal political education programs or new organizing initiatives. We should always remember that whatever gains labor makes in the electoral realm, they will be a reflection of the power we've already built in workplace and society. So, Jen, not sure your thoughts on this, but, even though it's about the UK, I think, we deal with this question a lot in the US, like how much should unions focus on electoral politics, on a Democratic Party, or how much should they be focusing in-house and developing their own unions?
Yeah, so two thoughts. Number one is I, of course, thought immediately of Jane McAlevy's distinction between mobilizing, organizing, and advocacy. I know that we've talked about the distinction between mobilizing, which is energizing and bringing your base together for some sort of action, versus organizing, which is trying to actively expand your base. But Jane also talks about advocacy, which is what we see a lot of unions here in the US doing, which is, the unions that I suppose endorse Democrats. Like you said, I think that is the right thing to do, but advocacy is still, the legal and kind of lobbying arm of labor rather than the actual organizing part. So, for the UK context, I agree with you. I think that given where the capital L Labour Party is right now, it makes sense to kind of return to organizing or to start shifting some of the energy and attention there, as opposed to pouring everything into the kind of advocacy arm, I guess. And then, to bring it back to the US, because of course we have to, I think that, like you were saying, I think that it is correct and good that unions continue to endorse Democrats and continue to give money to Democrats. As you said, Democrats are still better than Republicans in 99.9% of the cases and the elections that come up. That said, I think that if we look to the 2016 election, where you saw, tons of major unions endorse Hillary Clinton in the general, but then there was some, what was it? Maybe you remember some shocking statistic, like over half of union households voted for Trump. Like, I don't bring that up to say that the union members took a reactionary turn. That's actually not what I believe. I obviously believe that the Democratic Party and especially Hillary Clinton was just so completely out of touch for that particular election that, some union members decided to roll the dice elsewhere. But that's all to say that, union leadership can continue to endorse Democrats and continue to sort of pour advocacy funds and resources into trying to get Democrats to win. But that doesn't always mean that the rank and file is going to be there.
Yeah, definitely. And, I definitely can't speak for what the rank and file of Unite is thinking, but, probably, the average worker in Unite is not following the battles in the Labor Party between the left and right very closely. And I think, there might be just general sense of like, why are we focusing so much on parliamentary politics? And that probably is why her message maybe was refreshing and resonated. And just to your point about, the high number of union households that voted for Trump, I think this is part of the danger is that if there's going to be like totally mindless cheerleading by labor leadership for Democrats, like you risk being very out of step with your members. And, think about right to work, for example. They kind of prey on this thing of like, well, our union's just wasting money given to Democrats, and that's why you should, choose not to pay dues and blah, blah, blah. Again, obviously, I don't agree with that mindset, but I think like it's playing on this thing of like, well, the unions are just funneling money to the Democrats. It has nothing to do with you as a member. Suddenly it creates some fertile ground to attack labor on that point. And, and I think it's also about what do we think is going to revive this left movement? So I think in the UK, there's, of course, many differences, but they're in a similar period to us where, it's the end of the Corbyn campaign, like the Bernie campaign has ended, and it's kind of like, where do we go from here? And part of that question is rebuilding the labor movement, even if there's not an immediate electoral return on that investment, to use a bad capitalist analogy. But, like that is part of the project. And I think what was so interesting about Bernie, so many of us, including me, we were always saying that, well, electoral politics is a reflection of social power. It can't stimulate it. And Bernie kind of proved us wrong in a way in flipping that script. But I do think like, it's kind of, we've reached the end of that cycle. And it still is clear that like, as far as that went and as far as Corbyn went in the UK, like if we don't rebuild the labor movement, our fortunes are still going to be, not in a good place. And, the UK's, it's not the same as us. Their union density is still around 23%. And to put that in perspective, in the US right now, it's about 10%. But the UK, just like us, has been experiencing a very steep decline in union density. And they feel, again, 24% sounds incredible to us, unfortunately, but they feel they're on the ropes too. And I think they're dealing with this question. And Sharon Graham is saying, like, we need to focus on how to expand as a labor movement. And that should be our primary focus at this moment.
I feel like they still have a chance to right the ship.
Yeah. Let's hope. It's like I would absolutely love to be sitting at 24%.
right at 24% union density. Yeah. No, I totally hear you. And actually, just to go off of that, I think that it's really incredible that Unite is the largest union in the UK and is also a powerful left-wing force. And as you pointed out, is made up of construction, logistics, what we might call blue collar workers, right? There just isn't anything like that exists here in the US, I don't think. Like, I wouldn't even really count the AFL-CIO. They're great for other reasons, but I don't see them as the type of political left-wing operative that Unite seems to play. I don't see them playing the same role that Unite seems to play in the UK. And this is like super anecdotal, but I remember like, I don't know, a few years ago, I was watching like some like makeup video on YouTube. I swear this is going somewhere. And the makeup artist who is British, somebody had asked her oh, who did you vote for in the last election? And she said, I voted Labour because I'm working class. And I just feel like you can still say that in the UK, although you're right, the class de-alignment is happening there too. Labor obviously has undergone some pretty serious shocks over the last, 2, 3, however many years. But you can still say that in the UK and it makes sense. And there just isn't anything like that here.
I think here that line would be like, I'm voting Democrat because I make under $500,000 a year.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. And like, I live in San Francisco or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And something interesting, I just found like in doing the research for this segment, like just a big difference in our political cultures is like this election was like a big deal throughout the UK. Like the major news channels were covering it. Like, for example, there's a big election in the Teamsters Union coming up. for national leadership, that's actually is a very big deal. But like, I highly doubt you're going to see much coverage of it in any mainstream media. But again, it just kind of just shows the different position of unions in the UK as compared to here. Is that this is a major political story that people, if you're paying attention to politics, you're paying attention to this internal union election, and like that just is not going to be happening here, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, even in the wake of Richard Trumka's death and kind of speculation about who might take over the AFL-CIO, which, you know, on a prior show we had kind of talked about that, and some people had been sort of rumbling about who might take over even before Richard Trumka passed away. But the point is that those were just labor nerds, like leftists and labor nerds, and like I don't think anybody, you know, in the like wider mainstream media like cared at all.
Right. And again, just the thought that Unite actually has such a big influence in the Labor Party, that there is this fear that under Sharon Graham, they won't have that same influence. Mm-hmm. Again, kind of incredible to think about that. Like, again, let's say they were worried that if the Teamsters elected someone, you know, we wouldn't have the same huge level of influence among Biden, which we just don't now. But again, it just shows like they are a major player, and like that fear, although I kind of disagree with it, I don't think it's coming out of nowhere. The fact is that Unite still has a high degree of ability to set policy and influence the direction of the party.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.